this afternoon. The subject we're talking about is sharing is caring, so collaboration between the health and social care sector and the third sector. And I think the nub of what we're talking about here is that there are many partnerships between different organizations, sometimes, for example, health boards working with councils or voluntary organizations working with each other and with health boards and others in partnership. But sometimes the situation arises where there are barriers to be overcome in terms of sharing data. And sometimes it's not necessarily a showstopper, but sometimes it delays the progress of a project. And there's also quite often an issue with referrals to services. So for example, somebody might create a new service that's appropriate for younger people, older people, or whatever, but they need people to be referred to it. And sometimes that doesn't work as smoothly or as well as one might imagine. So what we're going to do this afternoon is particularly explore these points with a panel, and I'll introduce the panel right now. So if I could ask Michelle, if you could just tell us who you are and where you're from, first of all.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Michelle Carruthers and I'm Chief Executive of Scottish charity Food Train, and we support older people living at home with a range of informal and practical supports that wraps around formal care provision.
Thanks, Michelle. And Rab?
Oh, hi, folks. I'm Rab Campbell. I'm a director at Wallet Services. I beg your pardon. I'm a director at SICCAR. We've just renamed ourselves, and SICCAR's Old Scots for Trusted and Sure. And we provide a digital trust network to allow consenting parties to better collaborate and secure data sharing while giving citizens control over who can see that data.
Okay. And Aaron?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Aaron Slater. I'm Digital Participation Manager at the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations, SCVO, the national membership body for the voluntary sector in Scotland, and I specifically work on our digital inclusion team.
Thanks, Aaron. And I should have said who I am. I too work for the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations. I work in a project called mPower, which is an EU-funded project involving 3 health boards in Scotland, 2 in Northern Ireland, and 2 areas of the Republic of Ireland, which is focused on supporting older people. And I've had some experience of some of the issues that we're kind of going to talk about today. This session will largely be a conversation. It's not a series of presentations. It's just a conversation between us all. We're going to kick it off with a very short video. It only lasts about 2.5 minutes, and then we'll open up the conversation. And if you like, the protocol would be you can flag up questions or comments using the chat facility. But also, if you want to come in on any conversation or ask any questions verbally so that we can all hear you, then you're more than welcome to do that as well. Just flag yourself up and we'll take it from there. And we're being helped today by Iona Murray, who's dealing with the technical aspects, who you've just met. So if you, Iona, if you want to set the reel and show us the video, please.
Hopefully you can all see.
Yep, good for me.
Well over 1 million people aged over 65 are at risk or suffering from malnutrition in the UK. At the last estimate, the cost of the NHS was around £20 billion per annum. This condition cannot be fully treated in hospital, and so is an ideal opportunity to arrange support services from the voluntary sector on discharge from hospital. But making this arrangement is not currently straightforward. A trust platform is required to allow citizens to share sensitive information with health, statutory care and voluntary sector providers. Take the example of malnutrition sufferer Mary and her dietitian Julie, who has used the Malnutrition Universal Screening Tool Score, MUST score, to diagnose Mary's condition. Before discharge from hospital, Julie finds a certified voluntary sector service provider for Mary. She works with Mary to complete the necessary application form and store her information in a safe and secure digital wallet, which allows the service to be initiated. Mary's son takes control of her wallet and shares data with those who need it. Food Train helps Mary eat well at home and monitors her condition, including her MUST score. They raise a flag when her condition deteriorates. Mary is readmitted to hospital and her MUST score data is visible to her doctors. Mary is diagnosed with celiac disease and, when discharged, this is added to her wallet so that Food Train is made aware. SICCAR delivers safe and secure data sharing, digitally signed by trusted parties, and the patient stays in control of their own data. The availability of better data can reduce delay and risk of further healthcare treatment, and SICCAR enables effective collaboration between the health and voluntary sectors.
Thanks for that. So I hope you agree that that very short, snappy video sort of shows us that sometimes when you're looking to assist somebody, there's a whole range of people who've got an interest in helping that person achieve a set of outcomes. But data needs to be shared between trusted parties. So maybe just if you have a think about in your own environments, within your own organizations, if you maybe have a think about how data is shared between your organization and others at the moment, and think of any questions or comments that you might want to throw into the conversation or at the panel. But if we can kick off by, if we turn to you first, Michelle, you've got practical experience of these issues and have been working towards solving that. So how difficult do you think it would be to implement an approach to solving this, and what were the barriers that you've experienced, or what do you think the barriers are towards trying to solve these issues?
Thanks, John. I think for us over the years, one of the barriers that has been perpetuated over the years has been the lack of clarity about the voluntary sector's position in somebody's care and support at home, and that we always sit outside those formal the formal boundary of health and social care, if you like. So when we receive information, it might be directly from the hospital, it might be directly from a discharge team for somebody in the community, or it might be from an occupational therapist or a dietitian. What we're receiving is just a phone call or an email to say, can you provide support and service to Mr. or Mrs. X, with some very scant details. What we're not getting is that fuller picture about the person. In particular, things around their nutrition and their diet and their well-being in that respect, that would allow us to provide them with a better and enhanced service to support their own individual needs. So not only is there a barrier about the information that comes to us because we sit outside of all that, there's a barrier for us feeding back. So we may be after, for example, if somebody's discharged, they may receive some short-term care and support from health professionals, and that gradually might taper off as they recover. But we then might be the support service that's in their home 2 or 3 times a week even for a prolonged period of time, and therefore gathering a huge amount of information about that person's well-being that can be fed back, but there is no mechanism for us to do that. And essentially all we've got in our armoury is a 999 call if we need it, or an emergency social work referral. So there's quite significant barriers, and I think it's about how the voluntary sector is seen in terms of the partnership side of things. So that might get things started off.
So you take somebody who's being discharged from a hospital, so they're an NHS patient, effectively, and you provide useful, something that's going to be beneficial towards their health. But because of this, if you like, there isn't an easy pathway to feeding back what you've been doing and what the impact of that is. Does that suggest that what you do, the value of what you're providing isn't sort of being appreciated in the great scheme of things? Is that?
I think it's not about the value of what we're doing not being appreciated. It's about that you have statutory bodies which, as we know, struggle to talk to each other within health and councils, where the crossover is with health and social care. So to add the voluntary sector in, as an independent organisation to this sort of data sharing side of things is really challenging for them. And we don't have any formal arrangements in any of the partnerships where we have contracts around parts of Scotland where we operate, but in particular for what we provide, which is people's weekly shopping, meals, support with meal planning and eating and so on. Something even as simple as their must score on discharge would just be massively helpful to us. And where we've done small projects where we've worked with a specific dietitian, it's not because there's been a good system, it's because there's been a good person. And that's allowed us to put in place really, really robust support for a person over maybe 6 or 8 weeks. And by the end of that, their must scores improved. They're eating 3 meals a day, snacks, we're shopping, we're meal planning, and it's all working, and we're in contact with the community dietitian or the hospital dietitian. But it's because we've got a good relationship and it's a one-on-one thing rather than a sector-wide or a regional-wide approach or a commissioned approach or a systems approach.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Turning to you, Rab, can you give us an overview of how SICCAR works, what you do, and how you're going about potentially solving some of the problems that Michelle experiences?
Sure, John, yeah. So, I mean, Michelle is clearly at the sharp end of things, and I think, as we all appreciate, technology in itself solves absolutely nothing, and it's about her improving her service and this feedback loop, which I think the video described to some extent in terms of you updating in a two-way interaction, and that data is signed, digitally signed by the source. So a must score that's performed by the NHS might have a more certainty about it than a must score that might have been delivered by Michelle's people, and there's different types of tests you can do. But SICCAR fundamentally it supplements rather than replacing existing databases. And you're all familiar within your own organisation. It uses cryptographically secure distributed ledger to provide a trust platform that exists outside each individual organisation's firewall. It makes it quicker and easier to construct and deploy reusable data sharing impact assessments and data sharing agreements and templates. So it could be that Michelle puts something in place with St John's Hospital and her organisation, and Michelle will have a long list of things she'd like to know about a discharged patient, and the hospital will have a very long list of all the things they know about that patient, and it almost imposes a need to collaborate and work through and justify why these 6 bits of information are important. And to take a simple example, as well as medical information, if someone can't get to the front door, the volunteer probably needs to know the key code to get into the house, as well as their blood pressure and whatever it might be. So what's different about what we do compared to sort of traditional technologies is it facilitates peer-to-peer collaboration, in as much as there's not a hierarchy, which I suppose is what Michelle was maybe describing a little bit about the one-way imposition or direction of data. And it allows verified information from trusted sources to be shared in a manner agreed by all the parties involved. The agreed rules are enforced programmatically, and it puts citizens in control of who can see that information. Okay.
So what stage are you at with your work on this? Are you providing a service directly for Food Train just now that's help?
No, we're not. What was described in the video is what we call a service design blueprint.
Okay.
The company's been on the go for 7 years. We've spent about £2 million developing SCCAR. We're at the stage which is euphemistically called, we're a tech scale up. And that means as well as the money we've spent, we raised 1.4 million at the end of last year to scale the business up. The work you see described in the video and the report that lies behind it, which if any, it's 13 pages, if anyone wanted to see it, we'd be happy to share. But that was commissioned by the guy called Graham Cummings, who's the innovation manager at NHS Lothian. So we finished that project in November, and there is apparently another round of funding we're expecting to hear shortly, where we can take it forward to pilot. And we're hoping to do that in West Lothian, where Michelle has quite a strong existing footprint, and actually implement it between St John's Hospital and Food Train. Yeah, and see what happens. But we think with the Feely report coming out and this sort of idea that government's yet to respond to formally of having a national care service free at the point of delivery, that's going to be a very hard thing to do without getting, in our view, and I think obviously Michelle's view, a much better. And I'm at the boring end of things. This is about sort of systemization, but I think what Michelle described is sort of tacit knowledge that a dietitian knows about Food Train. They're keen to get involved, and things happen. We're all, I mean, this is Cyber Week. We're all concerned about data and breaches and so forth, but things happen at the side without them being necessarily known about and auditable, and indeed valued. I mean, Michelle told me, she got some money from the big lottery to look at malnutrition in Scotland. Now, in theory, at least, all hospitals should, for people over 65, they should perform this must score. So when they're discharged, they know the distribution, the geographic distribution of people who are suffering malnutrition. But I won't mention some of the words that Michelle used to describe the difficulty in getting hold of that information to construct a heat map of Scotland, as well as the actual support, the better support of people. This data should be used better to plan policy and to identify problems that need to be addressed in the community.
Okay, just a wee technical thing. Is a must score an accepted standard?
I defer to Michelle.
Yes, the Malnutrition Universal Screening Tool is used widely across all of the UK and meets NICE guidelines, but we've also been trialling two very reputable community methods of malnutrition screening that we've been rolling out for the last 2 years alongside work with Scottish Government. So this is about, Rab talks about the three-legged stool. This is about making the third leg of the stool a bit stronger as well, and strengthening how community organisations can work directly with what the NHS needs, as well as the people using health and social care. But yes, very much a recognised screening tool.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Moving to you, Aaron. Your role is wider than this, but can you just give us a snapshot of where SCVO fits in, particularly in the work we've been doing on digital over the last few years, and any resources that might be available to, particularly for voluntary organisations that are going along new paths digitally?
Yeah, so I think probably more widely as an organisation, our role is to, I suppose, highlight the great work that the voluntary sector does in Scotland, and picking up on what Michelle talked about how in the voluntary sector we can sometimes feel like we sit in the periphery of those formal structures around health and social care. The voluntary sector in Scotland, our most recent State of the Sector report, which was based on figures from 2018, showed that 4 out of 5 people in Scotland used a voluntary sector organisation that year. It's a sector that has a £6 billion annual turnover, and it's over 40,000 organisations in Scotland. So it's a huge sector which does some really great work. More specifically, in our team within digital, we kind of have 2 offerings, I suppose, how we can help organisations in the voluntary sector. One side being digital evolution, so helping voluntary sector orgs get up to speed with thinking about their digital maturity, benchmarking that and seeing where they can grow and provide better digital services. And then our side of the team is around digital inclusion, which I think is really relevant, because if we're thinking about how it's essentially about being digital citizens to some extent, and how people can share that information. And I think part of that for me is about people being empowered as well, and being able to have the skills and confidence to manage their own data if it's in the digital world. So a lot of the work we do is around upskilling organizations to support citizens to be more digitally included, build their skills and confidence, and be able to access essential public services that they need. And then within that, we see a lot of great work and collaboration between public sector and voluntary sector. Recently through Connecting Scotland, we've seen some really great collaboration examples in there, and also some more new funding opportunities that we've released actually just this morning, where we'd really encourage collaboration between public sector and voluntary sector through Digital Participation Charter Fund. And there's one specifically in for Edinburgh and Lothians with Edinburgh and Lothians Health Foundation, thinking about using digital tools. So there's some funding opportunities there for people to dip into and apply, and really encourage collaboration.
Excellent, thanks. So these funds have that's kind of hot off the press, isn't it?
Hot off the press this morning, yeah.
Yeah. So there's an opportunity for people to, if they need resource to develop digital processes, then there's potential to secure resources to help with that. We've had a couple of questions or comments come in. First of all, from Rod Bond. Rod, you don't know I don't think you know who I am, but I know who you are. And I'm involved with the mPower project, and you spoke at an event a few weeks ago, so I heard you there. So
I remember you, John, yeah.
Well, you do?
Yeah.
Oh, thanks for that.
And I think we met in Dundalk also.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, Rod, you're asking, or do you want to ask the question? And
yeah, I suppose it's just around the citizen being at the center of this and being in control. So my question was around, how does the citizen control what's in that wallet, and how can they control who can see it or who can not see different pieces of information in it? I mean, how in control is the citizen, or are they just a bystander in it?
Okay, I think that's one for you, Rab.
Yeah, I think it probably is. I think the idea we have is that it's what's called a private permission ledger. So, I mean, the technology we use is the same technology that's used by Bitcoin, but we're not in the cryptocurrency space. It's just a similar technology. And Bitcoin's quite a linear process, so that I have a Bitcoin and I sell it to you and it's transferred, and so it goes on. We use a slightly more direct acyclic graph, so that we can spawn quite complex transactions. In terms of the citizen centricity of it, there's quite a lot of talk about medical wallets and so forth, and that is the idea we have, that people have information that they can expose to other people within this permissioned network. And what we add is the veracity and the source of that information. It's come from the NHS and it's come from St John's Hospital or wherever it might be. Now, in the little video, if Mary had a social worker for the council, and the council were a part of this network, Mary might, because she quite likes a social worker, and he pops in every week, and she'd quite like him or her to be able to see her progress as she hopefully recovers with food train support. So it's quite a flexible solution, and basically it's sort of driven by transactions on a phone or your laptop or whatever it might be. And indeed it could be Mary's power of attorney, or in the case of the video, her son, who takes control of that wallet. And if there's a node in the network, such as the council, that information can be exposed to the council and they can see the veracity of the information. But we're very much sort of back end, quite crunchy technology using cryptography and public and private keys. And that would be brought to life through the front end apps that were used. be that specifically for this malnutrition type scenario, or perhaps for broader scenarios. I hope that goes some way to answering your question, Rod. Did you want to ask me a supplementary before we move on to Jeff's?
That's fine. Thank you, Rob. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's it's Michelle's people who are really doing the job. We've got the citizen in the middle, and we're facilitating that sort of process. So I can see Jeff's get 3 comments that I suspect you'll probably direct in my direction anyway, John. Would it be useful if I just sort of talk them?
Yes, yes, by all means.
So some quick thoughts. I completely agree. Jeff's saying I think the behavioural challenges are greater than the technical, and happy to expand on that. I would absolutely agree. And would you like to expand on that for a few minutes, Jeff?
Maybe not a few minutes, but maybe just briefly, some of the work that we were looking at on rare diseases, where they've got a similar idea, although not so technologically evolved. The challenge that they had was that when they took the information into the hospital environment, the secondary care clinicians weren't that interested in looking at it, on the basis that they effectively wanted to work up their own understanding of the case from their own practice and knowledge. And so I think that's one of the big, so I think the idea that this is something that the citizen is carrying with the capability to both advocate for themselves or for family members to use to advocate is really quite powerful in this. I've got a colleague from the Republic who tells the story about the sheepdog trials, where the farmer wins every prize and comes back the next day and confesses that actually it wasn't the dog, he'd actually trained the sheep. Which I think that's one of the key ideas here, is that you're effectively, by giving people access and control of information, you're equipping them to take validated information into other settings and to be able to use it. So I think thinking that way is really important. The second point, I guess, is just in terms of complexity and duplication. It's just this sort of idea that it's not going to work if there's 30 different versions of this, and health and care partnerships have got, but so something there. But, you can see the other comments. One of the big lessons from shielding was, I think we uncovered a lot of people who probably were not getting enough food week in, week out, because we were running the SMS service, and we could actually see the interactions and what was going backwards and forwards in that, and it was quite clear that there was people who probably were struggling ahead of COVID. That was uncovered. So
well, and just to pick up, I mean, in terms of the 57 varieties, I completely agree with that, Jeff. I mean, we're following this WC3 standard that I think, what's his name, Tim Berners-Lee is the sort of president of this group. We haven't done it yet, but it is our intention. We're going to have to open, or we want to, and we're going to have to be credible in a public sector setting. People need to be able to validate the code we've got that provides the security. So that's very much on our development plans. And we aim to conform to standards as they exist and as they emerge through time. And on your third point about food being a big issue, I mean, it's the most fundamental issue. I mean, in my dealings last year with Michelle, she really got me fired up about this. And for us, I mean, we've, as I explained, we're aiming to scale our business and find use cases that allow us to do that. And I think food's a good example that we can then use to talk about mental health and a whole lot of other things. But I mean, with the publication of the Feely report, and I mean, Michelle's got enormous knowledge in this area. She's got 1,500 volunteers. She supports thousands of people. This is something that Scotland should be capable of putting out on a national basis. Bringing volunteers on board. It's cost effective. The Feely report highlights that one of the reasons they didn't nationalise care or make it private sector is actually the third sector delivery of care is actually better than the other two sectors. So there's a real opportunity to grab that little video we've got and hopefully take it further. And you had a fourth point there. Will this work tie in with the ST work on identity? Yeah, we're sort of banging in the door there, Jeff. I wouldn't say we're necessarily getting enormous hearing, but we're aware of what's going on. And they're looking for a partner at the moment, and the partner that we think will win that business, we've got a relationship with, and they know what we do. but sometimes for the small guys it can be quite difficult to get heard. But with our new funding last year, we're getting geared up and professionalised, and we brought in professional help to help move things forward.
Can I ask what is going on in terms of the Scottish Government's work on identity and authentication management? What's going on there?
I would defer to Jeff.
Yeah, it makes my head hurt, but I'll have a go at doing a sort of a brief snapshot. Effectively, it's trying to create a public sector capability so that you can take your identity from organisation to organisation and feel safe. So a bit like you might do using your Facebook, which I really hope you don't, to log on to different things, or your Google log on to different things, on the basis that it's able to demonstrate that you are you. To those other purposes. So they're developing an attribute-based approach which enables them to create fragments of identity, so that, you know, if I've applied for my driving license, I can use my driving license identity to apply for my passport, and yeah, that's probably the most obvious. But again, it ties into the sort of ecosystem of things, and I you know, there is the potential, and I know that the Scottish Government are talking about that not just being used by public entities, but also by trusted third parties. And I guess that would be a question here as to whether some of the attributes that you might use in terms of information moving between systems would again be based around that common model, in addition to the other elements you brought. Can I ask a question of you, John? Because I guess buried in my sort of question too there is a question of diversity and fragmentation. You know, is this the sort of area where SCVO would take an interest in promoting, you know, a model that might be used across multiple organizations, rather than each organization developing their own approach to it? Because, you know, whether it's RAB's model or somebody else's, you know, again, the idea that, you know, BHF, you know, Macmillan, Food Train, you know, this is the same problem multiple times. Yeah. And it's, you know, the idea of there being a common approach to it across organizations would be really powerful.
It would make sense to have something that's easy understood across all sorts of parties, rather than having, you know, forming a partnership where suddenly behind all this is that different people have different IT and legal domains, and they don't quite understand each other. So if there's something that's standard, that makes sense. But in practical terms, you know, there's so much where you can expect, you know, where resources are going into doing something where they don't quite get to where they want to go because of issues like this, data sharing, or it's held back. So something that smooths that out makes sense. And as Aaron said earlier, you know, the voluntary sector is huge in terms of numbers of organizations, you know, like we're talking 25,000 registered charities in Scotland, but beyond that, you know, there's probably something like 45,000 organizations in total, and particularly small community groups who do things of use to an older person, provide an activity or a service. You know, even the smallest organization comes up against these conundrums about data sharing. So you know, it makes sense to have something that's fairly standard, commonly understood amongst all agencies.
I think just to come in that as well, maybe something to draw some experience from is just think about the last year, and as we've all pivoted to digital service delivery and the different platforms for communicating with citizens, and that, I mean, there's not loads, but you've got your Zoom, your Teams, your Google Meets, and, you know, the rollout of Near Me for social care services as well. So I've had a lot of reflection on, you know, what is the ask then for the citizen who's got low to none in terms of digital skills, and asking them to, I suppose, get to grips with 4 different possible comms platforms for them to be able to engage with services. So I think there might be some learning there for about how, I don't think we're there yet in terms of how we actually iron out that issue for making our services universally accessible to people who are digital services, and what can we take from that when we think about digital identity. and how the citizen manages that.
Yeah. I mean, our view certainly is that citizens should be able to use multiple identities rather than sort of. John, could I be cheeky and ask Michelle a question?
Of course you can, yeah.
I was just wondering, we haven't actually discussed this, Michelle, but I think as well as the hospital and the council into the voluntary sector, we can all recognise that and you know how that could be smooth. But how much referral do you get from other voluntary organisations, or indeed refer people into other organisations? Because I suspect that is completely unseen by funders, and it's probably quite difficult given GDPR and so forth for the small organisations John was talking about to make happen.
Yes, we probably have something around 40 to 50 different types of referral sources, which come direct from a hospital ward to a GP surgery, to a housing association warden of a small sheltered unit, to the lady that does the cooking in the village lunch group, to the postman sometimes, or a neighbour or a family or the older person themselves. It is absolutely vast because it's completely and utterly open, and it's as simple as picking up the phone. And so as well as having that huge range of different types of sources for people bringing or sending us information about an older person, we also will then either signpost that older person, or if they're unable, we will refer them directly into things like, it could be a care and repair service, it could be a community alarm service, it could be a dementia group, it could be something for housing, it could be something to be like the priority register for Scottish Power. You know, so anything. It could be about citizens' advice for benefits, it could be the podiatry clinic, it could be, I mean, you name it. You know, it's such a broad range, because what we found over our 25 years is we almost become this sort of little hub of information for that older person. So we provide them within our welcome pack with a safe and independent living guide that gives them as much information as possible about what else there is out there in their local area. And then we sort of act as a bit of a conduit for them, because bearing in mind, we might be supporting somebody for 15 years from when they're 75 to 90, for example. And in that time, they might join us and not have any support. And then they might have a community alarm, and then they might go to the day centre, and then they might have carers coming in, and then they might go in and out of hospital, and then it might be a power of attorney. But we're the consistent organisation throughout all that time. So often we've got quite a large bank of knowledge of what's going on with them. So it's a really, really big range. And again, no formal structure in place, because it's about dealing with the local person, because we don't have these systems in place. And I completely agree with this standardised, you know, approach. And you know, what Jeff's saying about 57 varieties. I mean, we currently contract with a number of different health and social care partnerships around Scotland. You know, and you need a degree to understand 7 different degrees to understand the contracts that each one sends you, because they're all different for exactly the same service. You know, and that's before we even get to all the different people that we deal with. So standardisation, quality, and some national monitoring of that platform would be my pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
This might seem like a daft laddie question, but you know, for an individual, the data that's out on, say, me in different places, do I have a claim to ownership of that information? Is it my information, or is it the NHS's information, or is it the council's information, or is it a voluntary organisation's information? You know.
But John, it's always the citizens' information. I think that whenever Jane Freeman's been asked this question, that was always the answer that she's given. At the same time, those other organisations are legally required to hold information, and there are rules about what they can and can't do with that information, you know, including in respect to medical records and the restrictions on the degree to which those can be changed or deleted or things like that. But it is always the citizens' information which is held on trust by whatever public authority or private authority.
Okay, thanks for that, Jeff.
Oh, here's a question from Emily.
So, question from Emily. Do you want to come in, Emily?
Hi, yeah. I'm Emily, thanks for having me. I'm from Cohesion Medical. So I was just wondering the opinion of the panel, and probably Jeff as well, it'd be relevant to you, about the Digital Health and Care Institute, and when we're talking about standardisation of how people can connect from third sector to primary and secondary care and so on. What role do they play in that standardisation? Because that seems to be where people are directed to go. And currently with, I think, a project that they've just started with Storm being the kind of data exchange platform for the NHS. Are they the people that need to make this decision, or what do you think is their role?
So, do you want to take a stab on that, Rab?
Yeah, sure. And I'd be interested in Jeff's views as well. I mean, I've actually got a meeting later today with Chalmers Shute from the DHI, and we've been talking to him a bit about aware of Storm's involvement and MIDEX and so forth. So, I mean, Charles quite interested in what we're doing. I think, in my opinion, the DHI have quite a big role, but they're one of quite a confusing number of organisations in the sort of innovation space in health. I think what we've been talking to Charles about is, I think the idea of a digital wallet where people, I mean, Charles talks quite a lot about you know, using devices to record your blood pressure and bodily function and so forth, and sharing that with your GP. And that's a perfectly valid and worthwhile activity. We're more about service provision and connecting organisations up to provide that service in a safe and secure way, and saving people having to particularly with dementia or whatever it might be, re-explain things again, and looking at a minimal viable data set to smooth that transaction, which goes through a wallet, which, if you want a wallet, which is under the control of the citizen, which they might then, as a staging post to release that information to Food Train or whoever it might be. And also, if they feel that information is useful in their dealings with their GP or whoever else it might be, they can open that up. So I think we're probably in a more dynamic environment than the path that I understand DHI are currently pursuing. And we're more, while the citizen is at the centre, it's about allowing state bodies to release that data into shared environment. Jeff, what are you saying?
I know that prior to his current role, that Gregor Smith was doing some work chairing a group on standards, including in this area at the Scottish Government, involving a range of partners. So I don't know. So generally, we'd probably expect the standards work to sit with the sort of the national leadership as the umbrella body there. I think it is quite interesting, because we saw quite a lot of the Storm work. I've seen quite a lot of that over the last couple of years, and the blood pressure work and the glucose monitoring, and those all tend to be about the creation of ongoing data sets of particular types of clinical data, which is managed. The problem that we probably saw more on the ground when we went and talked to people was, recall doing a visit to Borders, and as community health would visit, and as social care, whether voluntary or statutory sector, would visit individuals, each house would have two folders, two ring binders inside the door, and they would effectively update the ring binder with what had happened or what the current state is, so you could see exactly what the current position with the individual is, like, has been feeling a bit down, hasn't eaten properly for the last couple of days, felt a bit dizzy. That sort of information could be held there. But the challenge is, first of all, they've got two of these things, one for each. But also, the only way in which you have access to it is if you actually go to the house and open the door and go in and actually open the folder. So that type of information, which is current and valid, I think is one of the key types of data, which tends to be less structured. It's answering particular questions, but it's not sort of like 1.03/4. It's not like a blood pressure or something like that. So I think the work is is different because, and this is also a lot more embedded into, I think, the service design space, the service flow. But those are just my thoughts. But Jonathan Cameron at Scottish Government might be the person to talk to about standards. Yeah. I know that they've been doing some work there.
Yeah. Actually, on standards, John, it might just briefly explain. We just embarked on a project down south, implementing a referral standard that's been defined by the Department of Housing and Communities, the UK department, it's to an organisation called CAST. So I think in the past there's been quite a lot of issues around how to find voluntary services, and it's about standardising the sort of lexicon that's used. So speaking to SCVO, we know about Milo and Alice, and I think sort of one of the inhibitors there is it's sort of standing data that people need to create, and then they need to maintain it, but there's not really any benefit of maintaining it. So to take the food chain example, I mean, I know Michelle's got half a dozen services that she offers, and if the means of a referral happening was her keeping those services up to date, so they pop up on a discharge nurse's screen because it's to do with food or whatever, and then that service can be offered, and the definition of the service is sort of locked into the ledger, if you know what I mean. It makes it a more, the standing data, the description of the service is part of the sort of weft and weave. So we've just started this project. It's quite snappy. It's just over a couple of months, but we hope that will be a foundation for building standardization and pulling the third sector into the care. Looking very comfortable there in that bouncy ball.
We've got a question from Fiona. Fiona, do you want to come in? And hi, Fiona.
Oh, yes, I'm here primarily to listen and update my understanding. I recognise quite a lot of the issues, having worked in the voluntary sector and in health at different times over the years. I'm also involved in a number of initiatives from a perspective of lived experience, particularly in relation to mental health, and I'm conscious that there is an increasing awareness of the digital divide in recent months as we all move on to more digitized ways of communication. So there's a lot in there. I'm particularly interested in the issues around consent and what you were talking about, Jeff, in terms of we as citizens owning this and understanding how our personal privacy can be protected. And I'm thinking partly of the digital aspects, but also when this eventually funnels through to the community, where we may more often, particularly as we get older, be receiving care from caregivers in the communities where we live.
Yeah.
Are you okay to come back on that, Jeff?
I think it is a really interesting set of issues, and I suppose the parallels I would think about would probably go back a bit in my career in terms of some of the work that we did around recovery and recovery stories. And one of the things that we were always very attuned to was that people wanted to have continued control over their stories, not just at a particular point in time. So that it might be something that they want to share now, but they wouldn't want to be shared in the future. So that sort of granularity. I think the other side that we saw, and again particularly in probably more attenuated in the mental health space, is the set of issues between people who would expect their doctor in Fife to know about them, because even though they're a Lothian patient, as opposed to those who would wonder why the doctor in Fife would know about them. And again, just that, it felt at times as though those issues were a lot more important. So people really did actually need to understand why and how information moved around. So I think it probably does come down in this area to the ongoing ability of the individual to be able to control the information, but also some of the cultural expectations that then brings, that the permissions can be withdrawn in the same way that they can be given. But yeah, I think these are general issues that are just slightly more attenuated, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks.
It does, Jeff, and alongside that, I'm conscious, having engaged with some of the events in Cybersecurity Week, one of the messages that I'm hearing about, things that all of us should consider in terms of digital housekeeping, is being aware that for people who are looking to target, for whatever reason, target people who are vulnerable, then particularly older people, because we're seen as not being, we're seen as being less digital savvy, or if people for whatever reason have not had an opportunity to kind of keep track with evolving understandings, then people may be more vulnerable. And thinking of in the community, we know that one of the main areas of vulnerability that has increased, particularly for older people, but in other areas as well, is the risk of financial exploitation. So yeah, I wonder how all of that can be addressed, because it's people who are currently vulnerable who will also be particularly vulnerable, as well as potentially more easily identified in these potential benefits.
Yeah. Actually, sorry.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right, and it's a significant, I think it's about balance of risk. I mean, for example, the work we're doing down south at the moment, one of the issues of concern on the charities we're working with is, if you publish the address of a hostel, for people with drug issues and homeless people, that can be targeted by people with malicious intent, if you want. So I mean, I think you're absolutely right, Fiona. I suppose, and Jeff's definitely talking sense in this as well. I mean, I suppose my observation is it's really, in some ways, incredible that people give that data away to the likes of Facebook and so forth, but they're very concerned in these settings, and opening it up to the voluntary sector is dangerous. But I think it's about balance of risk, and I think it's about educating people. And I think the point Jeff made about the granularity of data, like what can be seen. I mean, the sort of classic example for a younger person is, you shouldn't have to show your passport or your driving license and your date of birth and your address to a bouncer when you want to go for a drink. He or she's got a valid reason for knowing, or justification for proof that you're over 18. But so you're almost using data to provide a QR code that he can or she can scan that says this person is over 18, and that's it. So I think the minimal use of data for the purpose intended is quite a large part of this.
Yeah, and turning to you, Aaron, Connecting Scotland is basically all about getting devices to sometimes very vulnerable people who are using technology, digital technology, for the first time. So the issues that Fiona's just thrown up, what's gone into the thinking within SCVO and that program in relation to the dangers that people can be exposed to through technology?
Yeah, it's what I apologize. My cat just loves it when I'm on a Zoom call and always has to sit on the desk and.
He is a cat.
So it's an issue that we've always grappled with their work with digital champions and digital inclusion projects generally. It's that thing of there's always that risk. You're introducing new technology, you're introducing the internet to someone for the first time, and there are of course a lot of risks associated with being online, as there are a lot of risks in the real world. It's just that we've been socialized and brought up to understand a bit better the risks in the real world, whereas for some people, the understanding those risks and how to mitigate some of those risks online hasn't been part of their learning. So any work we do around digital inclusion, those kind of messages around online safety are kind of key themes that are embedded into anything. So like in Connecting Scotland, for example, we did a series of webinars and pulled together a lot of resources on online safety to empower digital champions to promote those key messages to the people they were supporting to get online. I think it is, it's education, it's empowering people to make informed choices. So kind of, I suppose, showing them the benefits of being online and being involved in the digital world, so they can make informed choices about how they want to take that forward and what people are comfortable with. And there's different levels of comfort engaging with different services or doing different things online. But it's definitely, for us, it's always been embedding online safety messages in everything we do around digital inclusion.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. We're just about coming to the end of our allotted time. Does anybody want to throw in any last minute comments before we go?
Okay, I find this fascinating. Thank you very much. And I'm fortunate enough to hear Rab's colleague Peter Ferry talk about the Estonia model, where they have this already in place for all sorts of things. And that model, and I presume the ambition for SICCAR is that it goes across multiple services, not just health and social care. What's going through my head here is who pays for it then? If you've got multiple agencies involved.
It's a really good point, Simon. And by the nature of what we do, we don't have one customer, if you want. It's about collaboration. So I think in Scotland we're quite fortunate in as much as these health and social care partnerships as the public face of integrated joint boards, and they've been running since 2014. And the idea is to take a sort of holistic view in terms of the allocation of resources that might cost the council something, but you get 10 times the benefit in the NHS and vice versa. But it's a challenge you're quite right in identifying, and it's not straightforward to overcome. I think we're on a call with some folk down south recently, this morning actually, and they were saying, I think we've got a fairer wind in Scotland, particularly, I don't know if you've seen the report by Derek Feely that came out just a couple of weeks ago. We've got a commentary on it, or a response to it, that we might just send out to everyone at the end of the session. But Derek's basically proposing that they're, in the same way as we've got an NHS, we should have a national care service. And that should, people should have rights in terms of going beyond the statutory care that we all sort of know about, in terms of getting people out of bed and getting them dressed and making them lunch and so forth. I mean, my view in the public sector is it needs to be done at scale on a national level. We obviously need to pilot these things and test them out, and hopefully sort of bring them into operation fairly quickly. And that's what we're hoping to do through the project. The video you've seen is from that project we finished last year, and there's some more funding coming through, where we're hoping, Michelle and I are hoping we can work together in West Lothian, where she's well established, working with St John's Hospital to prove out the benefits of our approach. And hopefully, given post-pandemic and all the rest of it, and the sort of increasing recognition of the need for social prescribing, we can get the bandwagon rolling. But at the end of the day, I think you know as well, if not better than me, it's about showing tangible results and how they can scale. Does that answer you? Is that okay for an answer?
Yeah, I expected that the answer was going to be it's a very difficult, and we don't quite know what the solution is. But it's just I'm commercial in my day job, so that was what was going around my head. Who's going to foot the bill for it? I mean, you've got different agencies, it's hard enough, but if you start bringing in private sector organisations, that's going to get even more complicated. I love the idea of that QR code or whatever it is to just prove who you are without giving away the data behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what's the purpose? This person is suffering from malnutrition. That's a yes, no. But Michelle needs to know a bit more than that, or she'd like to know a bit more than that. It's about the minimal. When we talk about minimal viable product, it's about minimal viable data disclosure to get a job done. and then putting that in the hands of citizens who may decide to share it with others. I mean, they might be unhappy with food trains, work with them for whatever reason, I can't imagine, but there might be some alternative provider that they could pass their up-to-date information across to. Yeah, yeah. No. Sorry, John, I'm done.
Okay, that's fine. Any other final comments before we go? Okay, I think that's us done. Sorry, we're a little bit over time, but I think that was a good, interesting discussion. And thanks everybody for